We'll see how the founding of the Minneapolis Park Board in 1883 was driven by economic interests, but also by a desire to preserve the natural beauty of Minneapolis for generations to come. What was accomplished in the 1880s and beyond is a remarkable illustration of how private and public interests were coordinated in a very public and open process to advance both private economic goals and public goals, building a park system that would serve all people in Minneapolis and preserving the most beautiful and healthful parts of our environment for generations to come. The 1880s was at the center of an economic boom in milling that ran well into the next century. These graphic benchmarks show how fast Minneapolis was growing as a milling and business hub. The population more than tripled to 165,000 by 1890. The city area was increased from 12 to 52 miles. Over 13 years, manufacturing increased to almost 1,000% of what it was in 1878. Wholesale trade was up more than fourfold. Milled lumber more than doubled. From 200,000 barrels in 1870, flour milling increased almost 30 times in 20 years to over 6 million barrels by 1890. Building on a manufacturing core, Minneapolis grew as a financial center, with 1890 bank clearings 1,500% of what they were in 1880. Local geography also shaped Minneapolis. The city is basically flat. There were, and still are today, many areas of great natural beauty. Foremost among these is a chain of 4 lakes extending from Lake of the Isles, about 2 miles from the milling district, south to Lake Harriet, over 4 miles out. Each of these lakes is about 3 miles around, perfect for a 1-hour evening walk. From Lake Harriet, Minnehaha Creek runs east for about 5 miles to Minnehaha Falls and then into the Mississippi. As we see from this graphic, technology was another growth driver. Patent flour, a new milling process introduced in the 1870s, made wheat grown in northern climates far more valuable, yielding what most people thought was the best flour in the world. Electric power, specifically electric streetcars, would make commuting to work over 5 miles or more practical in Minneapolis. Railroad and telegraph technology went hand in hand as rail lines expanded west, reaching the Pacific in 1893 and supporting both the physical movement of goods and the movement of information needed for finance and markets. These 4 businessmen and speculators played important roles in founding the Park Board. George A. Pillsbury, a successful businessman in Maine, moved to Minneapolis in his 60s to work with his son Charles in the milling business. In 1881, George Pillsbury became the first president of the Minnesota Brush Electric Company, which would be part of the infrastructure for the coming streetcar system. He was elected mayor of Minneapolis in 1884 at age 68. Colonel William King, a speculator, was postmaster of the U.S. House of Representatives for 10 years and served 1 term in Congress. He was a land speculator with a large farm on the east side of Lake Harriet. In 1882, Colonel King was also short of cash. The farm was transferred, the whole mess ended up in court, and King won a $2 million judgment in the mid-1880s. We'll come back to that dollar amount. Charles Loring, businessman, flour miller, founder or co-founder of many businesses and organizations, and all-around do-gooder, was far and away the leader in founding and developing the Minneapolis park system. He was the Park Board's president from the get-go in 1883 to 1890. Loring was also president of the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce for much of this time, 1886 to 1890. Thomas Lowry, businessman, controlled the horse-powered Minneapolis Street Railroad Company. When this system started the conversion to electric in 1889, it had 189 cars, 415 horses, and 69 miles of track. 4 years later, Minneapolis had a transformed streetcar system with new electric cars and new track. These businessmen and speculators, and others, led the campaign for the Park Board and built the foundation of our park system in the 1880s. Let's consider what they foresaw in the year 1883 and what their values were. It was obvious that Minneapolis would be driven by an economic boom that would be measured in decades. Minneapolitans had already thought this way for a long time. When the original downtown streets were platted, they were sized to the scale of Chicago. These people saw a relationship. The combination of an economic boom and streetcar commuters would drive land values up fast. They also understood that land appreciation could be both directed and supercharged by building a foundation for parks that would make it obvious that land and home values near those parks would increase rapidly for decades. In short, private economic interests would benefit from quickly establishing a park system on a scale far beyond what most cities the size of Minneapolis could contemplate. What did these businessmen and speculators value? Economic prosperity and profitable businesses, certainly, but they also put a high value on building for the future and thinking ahead 100 years. They wanted to be good stewards of the earth, an idea rooted in their Judeo-Christian worldview. These businessmen and speculators acted on a belief that public works and private interests could and should be coordinated in a way to reconcile and promote all of their values. Things moved quickly in 1883. Here's the timeline with some detail. We've already met some of the main promoters. In January of 1883, the Board of Trade was revived. Purpose: conducting a campaign for city parks. President: George Pillsbury. Secretary: Colonel William King. In January, resolutions were adopted calling upon the legislature to pass an act creating a park commission for founding of such a grand system of public parks and boulevards as the natural situation offers. Colonel King remarked, "No subject can be brought up which has such an effect upon the interests of the city. It is a scheme which will bring more capital, more population, and add more to the city's renown than any other scheme which could be devised. 2 years ago, we could have bought 700 acres around the lakes for $50,000, and today the property is worth $300,000, but no one would move in the matter, and the opportunity was lost. For what is now a mere bagatelle, we can lay out a system of parks which will be a pride of the city for all time to come, but there must be work done. It can be done in 40 days, and a system be devised which will add millions to the taxable real estate of the city." Colonel King's 40 days was no doubt intended to have a biblical ring to it. His prophecy was off by less than a month. The delay was due to the legislature's response to opponents of the Park Act. The City Council objected to the Park Act, saying the Park Board was being given arbitrary power without voter approval. The legislature responded, requiring Minneapolis to have a referendum. The Knights of Labor objected to the Park Act. Only the rich were represented. Although the people are kindly permitted to vote at the ensuing election for or against a park system, they are not allowed to say who shall serve as commissioners until 1 year hence, and the door is left open to rob the working classes of their homes and make driveways for the rich at the expense of the poor. Here's what the Evening Journal published February 13, 1883, as the battle was joined. "There exists in all cities a class of obstructionists and reactionary old fogies who set their faces like flint against any innovation or improvements. Their first move will no doubt be to excite jealousy by claiming that somebody is going to make something out of the park scheme. They will assert that it is nothing more or less than a gigantic real estate speculation on the part of a clique who are seeking to use the credit of the city of Minneapolis to promote their scheme. Supplementary to this will be the cry of taxes, taxes." As we saw, the Knights of Labor objected to the fact that they couldn't vote for park commissioners for a year. Here's something to think about, an excerpt from Ariel Trahan's 2007 honors thesis at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. From 1884 until today, Minneapolis has been, and is, the only city in the country where we elect our park board. The referendum was held April 3rd. The Park Act passed with 5 of 8 wards in favor, 3 against. The total votes and percentages were 5,327 votes and 58% yes. 3,922 votes and 42% no. We'll come back to the 3 wards that voted no.